you learn about balance sheets, as you know very fully. And balance sheets, if you think about it, are a shorthand way of understanding where you stand. You have assets, you've got liabilities, and you have equity, the difference between the two. I remember thinking about the idea, could you have, in a sense, the idea of a social balance sheet? Could you have positive outcomes, less negative outcomes, equaling, in a general sense, the well-being of the people? And I remember musing about that when I first came into the agency, because I felt there would need to be some kind of an organizing notion for a lot of the work that was going on, because it's far-flung, it's all happening. And then I ran into a guy named Mark Friedman. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or know him. And Mark was a former budget officer of the state of Maryland and had gone off within the zone and had put together what he called an outcomes and results framework. He calls it results-based accountability. I don't call it that, but it's the same basic idea. He and a couple of other people were really instrumental in helping us think through how to proceed. Okay. And since then, Mark and I have had the privilege of working all over the world on this stuff. The latest one being the government of Northern Ireland has picked up the Vermont model in whole. They just didn't pick it up, but after 5 years of work, that is their program, particularly for children. Robin sent you, or you have in front of you, a piece of a report called Vermont Community Count, and this was in 1994. Okay, in that report, there is a list of the outcomes that we worked on over a several-year period and put together. And I'd just like to go through them. This is the key part of my presentation. So I'll skip one. Pregnant women and newborns thrive. Infants and children thrive. Children are ready for school. Children succeed in school. Children live in stable, supportive families. Youth choose healthy behaviors. Elders and people with disabilities live with dignity and independence in settings that they prefer. And families and individuals live in safe and supportive communities. I would ask you to think about those outcomes. They're not outcomes that you normally would see in government. They're not outcomes about employment security, about human services, about health, about education. They're outcomes about the cycle of our lives, from birth to death. And we had this thought that if we could organize all this crazy information that agency had at its disposal that wasn't being used well, could we organize it around the cycle of life, from birth to death? Because that's where people in our communities are. That's not where we are here in the legislature or where government entities are. That's where people are. So that's what we did. And I'm compressing 10 years of work here in just a couple of moments. But we adopted these. Not only did we adopt it, you adopted them. These are a matter of law in Vermont, but they've been forgotten. They were put into law by Jane Kitchell, who was succeeded me as secretary and was Secretary of Human Services at the time. Very straightforward. The law basically says, this is what you will aim to do. Here's how you will report back to the legislature every year. And this is a book of 60 different indicators that fall into those outcomes. And you will do it in conjunction with education and health systems and universities. Now, over the years, the other thing I want to mention, we got some amazing, and I say we, I'm not taking credit either personally or for the agency, but Vermont got some pretty amazing results during that period. I want to read it. I just want to read a few quick ones for you. Just forgive me while I fumble here. Here we go. Child abuse and substantiated neglect down 32%, and these are 10-year numbers. Teen smoking down 32%. Later known prenatal care down 35%. Child abuse and neglect under age 5, which is particularly virulent child abuse, 35% down. Teen birth rate, minus 40%. Now, The rest of the nations was going down at the same time too. But we started at half the rate of the nations, and we plunged at greater rates than did the nation. We were doing something right up here in Vermont. Child deaths we cut in half. Alcohol-related motor vehicle deaths were down. Those were the mild ones. We had knowing who the father was went from something like 17% to 87% of the 10-year period. Knowing who the father was. Think about economic security and all that stuff goes with it. Lead levels of babies' brains down 60%. I'm not going to go on, but we did get some. We, and I mean we in the collective we, all of us together, working hard to work together, and the most important function of that work was what happened in the communities. Around these outcomes, there were a lot of local collaboratives that sprung up. The first ones, for those of you who've been around a while, were around the idea of success by six. That was the first phrase, if you will, the first outcome. You did well, okay? After that, that got converted into children that are ready for school as part of a more systematic way of thinking about it. But it was these community groups. See, the whole argument today is about money. There's more than money that makes change in human beings. And it has to do with energy and focus in your communities. I could show you a chart here in Barry, Vermont. Mr. McFarland lives there, which I'm not going to dig out. But basically, it was we published a thing on the front page of the Times Argus that basically was the dropout rate in Barry had gone through the roof. It looks something like the first half of that graph. It went through the roof. When that community came together for about a 7-year period to work on the dropout rate, it dropped down unbelievably and stayed there. Now think about the economic consequences of that kind of change. Think about the economic consequences of reducing teen pregnancies by 40%. And again, it wasn't us, the agency, it was anybody who cared who wanted to get involved in this work. Okay, what happened? What happened was that we lost momentum, and things change. We move, we go in another direction, but we ended up having 6 different secretaries in the HC Human Services over a 9-year period. You cannot, I don't care what organization, particularly someone that's as complicated and as rich in that as the kinds of enterprises that are going on. You just can't do that. You lose. You lose continuity, you lose focus. Now, in a simple-minded way, that's what happened. Second thing that happened was this report had been coming out regularly since 1992. Okay? This is the last one, 2006. It just was not valued, and it fell by the wayside. Third thing that happened was that the guy who was responsible for doing all of the work that went into this got pink-slipped. He is now an international expert down in Washington, D.C., working for Child Trends, doing work all over the world. He is undervalued. You lost that capacity here. The next thing that happened was that you lost a miserable $185,000 appropriation that they had used to give a little bit of elbow grease to those community little groups that grew up organically. It wasn't a lot of money in the scheme of things, but it kept them alive and interested in doing that kind of work. And they looked different in different communities. It wasn't an organized governmental function, which in my mind is what made it work so well. All right, so that's 2/3 of my presentation.